Welcome to the Politics News Wolf US channel. The Russian army invading Ukraine is going through a terrible time. The Russian army is completely out of control. Chaos and revolt within the army may cause Russia to withdraw from the war. Russia may soon have to leave Ukraine altogether. What caused the turmoil in the Russian army? How did one of the greatest armies in history come to the brink of disintegration? When we look at the organizational structure of the Russian army, we can find answers to these questions. The Russian armed forces has more than 1 million active members and 2 million reserve members. It is the second largest power in the world in terms of the number of soldiers. There are many soldiers from many ethnic backgrounds in the Russian army. Soldiers from ethnic groups affiliated with the Russian Federation caused crisis in the army. The establishment of ministry order in the Russian army is extremely difficult, given the size of its. As a matter of fact, it has recently emerged that the Russian army was losing power. Despite its large numbers, the vast majority of the Russian army is made up of mercenaries, but the army also compels the citizen to fight. In this case, there is an endless conflict of opinion between the young people who join the army and the merc. Seeing how privileged the mercenaries are the citizens' object. The compulsory military service, the group called Wagner, founded by mercenaries, is one of the biggest factors fueling this conflict. Wagner, one of the most comprehensive companies in Russia, is managed by Prigozhin, who is closely involved in politics. The fact that the manager is someone who plays a role in politics and can change the direction of politics, makes the Wagner group disobedient. The warriors affiliated with this group defy their commanders, causing many tensions. Untrained soldiers are sent to these areas forcibly to join the army because they refuse to fight in dangerous areas. This is why the citizen is extremely angry with the Wagner group and its commanders. Although the salaries of soldiers affiliated with Wagner are quite high, the salaries of Russian officers have not been paid for a long. This unfair distribution of resources within the army causes soldiers to hold rods against each other and cause problems. The salary crisis has made it impossible for the military to fight effectively. When the soldiers' backgrounds are added to this, the crisis grows. Soldiers belonging to ethnic groups, which are considered as minorities in Russia, do not want to be forced to fight under these bad conduct. Everyone agrees that there is a big problem like racism in the country when minority groups that do not feel a sense of belonging to Russia are in the army with the Russians. It is inevitable that tensions will rise. Russian commanders apply racist policies to minorities, which causes soldiers to disobey orders. In recent years, uprisings in the Russian army have increased. The fact that soldiers in the army are not treated equally makes them even more angry. Among these active groups, it can be said that the Chechens caused the greatest harm to the army. The rebellion of Chechens brought from and forced into the army could not be stopped. Russia punished the commanders who could not cope with the rebellions. The commanders will lost their posts, lost their respect among the soldiers, and the hierarchy in the army was badly damaged. The problems in the Russian army are much more than I mentioned about. The Russian military does not want to fight against Ukraine. By now, many have decided to surrender. The government does not know what to do in the face of this move of the soldiers. Now the question is, what are the soldiers' motivations for surrendering? First of all, the soldiers thought at the beginning of the war that they will take over Ukraine before it took. But it didn't turn out as they expected. Seeing the strength and determination of the Ukrainian army, the soldiers now want to accept defeat and anti-war. More and more Russian soldiers are dying day by day. It is known that the number of military casualties exceeds 100,000. The defeat of the Russian army in the war disappointed the soldiers. They realized that Russia is no longer as strong as it used to be, and they do not want to die for an empty. Because they don't believe they can win. They choose to surrender rather than fight. The Russian army wants the government and the commanders to admit that they have been defeated. The government still doesn't care if soldiers die. Soldiers go to war knowing they will be defeated. Fear in the army is growing day by day. Soldiers say they don't want to die for Putin. The people of the city are similarly opposed to. Everyone is now aware that the war is for Putin's personal ambitions. They are putting pressure on the government to have Putin stop the invasion and not force the soldiers to fight. Russia is in need of new soldiers and it has lost so many soldiers in Ukraine. He directed his troops from other parts of the world to the regions he occupied in Ukraine. This dragged Russia into a major international militant groups supported by Russia and Syria left their posts to fight in Ukraine. They left their positions in armed groups in Iran and Afghanistan and became involved in the Russia-Ukraine war. The biggest problem of the fighters coming from the Middle East is that they are uneducated. They do not suit trained Russian commanders because they do not know professional army management. They try to move irregularly because they lack coordination. This upset the hierarchy and ordering the army commanders trying to manage. Many different groups do not know what to do. In addition, these different groups create a new problem within themselves. Every day, the coexistence of mercenaries, enlisted citizens, and irregular fighters from the terror zone caused chaos. There are very few soldiers willing to fight in the Russian. While some surrender, others choose to flee from the army. Dozens of reports have been submitted describing the effort by Russian fighters to leave the army. Those who try to flee the war are arrested and tried for treason. It seems unlikely to escape from the Russian army, so the soldiers turn to another solution. An interesting incident occurred in the Ukrainian city of Kherson, which was occupied by Russia. With this event, the course of the war changed significantly. A Russian base located here surrendered en masse to Ukraine. Russian fighters Hoa white flag over Ukraine were taken hostage. The identities of the Russian soldiers overhosted at the military center of the Ukrainian army were first determined. Afterwards, the men who surrendered were given clean clothes and food. The Russians who stayed in a private dormitory were extremely happy with their situation. Russian soldiers who wanted to share their experiences with their friends who have not surrendered yet, took a video. They told their experiences and advice to other soldiers in the army to surrender. This post was met with great. The surrendering soldiers spoke of the good treatment the Ukrainians had shown them. They stated that even being a prisoner in the Ukrainian army is better than fighting in the Russian army. The soldiers who told their friends that the Ukrainian army fed them, clothed them, and prepared special dormitories, stated that they were happy that there was no danger of death. This video quickly spread in the Russian army. The video, which was shared many times in Telegram groups, caused Russian soldiers in the army to accept the idea of surrender. Soldiers' surrender ran mass to the Ukrainian army. For this reason, Ukraine was able to take back its occupied lands from the Russians. The crisis of the surrender of soldiers has become one of the biggest problems in the Russian commanders do not know how to resolve this crisis against the Russians. The government, on the other hand, dismisses commanders who failed to solve the problem. The commanders who could not prevent the soldiers from giving up, punished them severely. The choice of the Russians to surrender to the enemy destroyed the dignity of the army. No matter how hard the Russian government tries not to lose soldiers, it can't do anything. Censorship was imposed on video saying, the situation of surrendered soldiers in Ukraine is much better than that of the Russian army. Videos that do not appear in the media still continue to suppress in the military. Putin is said to be quite angry at this situation in the Ukrainian press. Videos showing that the Russians gave up and surrendered to Ukraine are very, instead of saying these images, the government chooses to show them to the world and to Russian citizens. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry also shared the moments when Russian soldiers surrendered to Ukraine on their social media accounts. The Kremlin is doing its best to ensure that such videos do not reach many people. However, they were not successful in this regard. The moment of surrender that took place in Ukraine has already spread and was greeted with interest by everyone. Russian fighters who chose to surrender to Ukraine met with the mothers of Ukrainian soldiers to thank the soldiers who surrendered. The mothers offered the foods they cooked. The behavior of the mothers of Ukrainian soldiers caused many soldiers to become. These emotional moments were recorded. It was shared on social media. Half the mothers who solved the Russian soldiers crying with emotion, consult them. A Ukrainian mother hugging one of the Russian soldiers consult the soldier who wanted to return home and wanted to end war. The Ukrainian mother said that they could video call the mother of the Russian soldier during the search. There were moments that made everyone who watched the video. The conversation between the Ukrainian mother and the mother of the Russian soldier affected everyone deeply. The video, which impressed everyone who was against the war, reminded everyone that it is very important to oppose what happened. Once again, Ukrainian mothers who showed mercy to Russian soldiers earned the respect of everyone who watched the. Undoubtedly, the surrender of the troops shows that the war is moving against Russia. Ukraine's policy towards the surrendering soldiers causes the Russian people and the Russian soldiers who have not surrendered yet to sympathize with the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian people also treat the Russians well who are against the war. Every soldier who surrenders is taken to a center where his life. And he's treated well. This policy of Ukraine is spreading more and more on social media. Day by day. The Ukrainian leader, Zelensky, who has been extremely successful in impressing people by showing them the drama of the war, is determined to continue this policy. What do you think about the crisis in the Russian army? What do you think the surrender of soldiers means? Will more Russian soldiers surrender? What do you think? Share your opinions. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe to our channel to update you with daily information.